Hi, this is a quick video to show off the snow module of MicroSplat. The snow module adds dynamic snow to the scene that you can control at runtime, and it integrates with weather systems through a shared API that Adam, who makes Gaia and CTS, and I have proposed for people to use. So let's get started. So I have a basic terrain here. I have some of the other modules running on here. I have distance resampling on, the normal noise, I have a single layer of that, and then I have tessellation on because it just looks great. Um, so let's add our snow feature. And so if we turn on the global snow option, MicroSplat will recompile the shader with the snow feature, and we'll get snow in our scene. And depending on our settings, we could get very different snow depending on what our terrain looks like and what the initial settings are. So before we go over some of the optional features, let's talk about those settings. So under the snow area here, we have a diffuse height map, which is basically diffuse in RGB and height in alpha for the snow. And we have a normal SAO texture for the snow normals. So basically that is the first two channels of a normal map, the smoothness and the ambient occlusion all back together. If you're interested in replacing the built-in textures with your own, there's information in the documentation about how to pack textures. But for most people, I think they'll just use the ones that are included because they look pretty good. So we have a UV scale for the snow. Right now I have this set to be the same as the terrain. I tend to want to keep things similar to the terrain because it keeps a consistent pixel density, but you may find you want different scales here, so that is available. There is the amount of snow in the scene, which should be fairly self-explanatory. So where we have areas of snow, how much snow do we have? Generally, when you're animating things like this, you're going to ramp this up pretty quick to get to the snowy scene. We have two options for height clearing and erosion. And so what these are is they take aspects of the underlying terrain into account. And if you turn on height clearing, as you turn that up, what it's going to actually do is clear things off the top of rocks first. So when snow melts, it does tend to come off the tops of things before it comes off of if you have protruding rocks, right? The sun tends to melt it on top, and so it tends to come off those areas first, and this will simulate that effect. Erosion is essentially the same sort of equation, but done with the ambient occlusion map. So if you think about an ambient occlusion map, that's telling us which areas are in shadows. So the areas that are in shadows are going to melt slower than the areas that are not in shadows because the heat of the light, right? And so that gives us a little bit of melting based on that AO map that gives us a slightly different effect than the height clearing does. And the two can be combined to create sort of patchy snow, however you want. One thing I will say is that these settings become much more useful when you have a more complex texturing, when you're using like the anti-tiling package. And that's because the underlying data that it's working with becomes much more complex and has much more variation. And so it tends to be what happens is if you aren't using the anti-tiling techniques at all, then you can see the patterning appear from a repeating texture, and then that will appear in your snow and it can become pretty obvious. And you can see some patterning right now as we just tiled the snow texture, and we'll get into dealing with that in a minute. So then next we have height range. This is basically just your typical height-based fall-off of snow. And so as you move this, this is a min and max. So if I move this down, you'll see I'll get more snow in the valley. But as I move it up, it's going to remove snow at lower areas. And the blend distance is controlled by the min and the max here. So if we set it to exactly 150, you don't really get a blend from the height anymore because of the same value. But if you set it, way up in the air, like 1,000, well, then we're going to be really low in the blend here, and we're not going to see it. So set that something back to something more reasonable. And the other thing we see here is called angle range. And this is a min-max slider, which is a nice way to edit these things. And what this is the angles at which snow will appear. So if I put this all the way over here, then it's only going to appear on the flat surfaces, right? And as I move this slider, you can see that it moves from the flat surfaces to the hills, and then eventually will only show up on, let me get somewhere it was lit, only show up on the sides of mountains here. So generally, if you want a completely snow-covered scene, you would open this all the way up and you get it everywhere. That doesn't look so great. Really what you want usually is that on really steep surfaces, you reduce the amount of snow so that you get these kind of nice snow packs along the flatter areas with it falling off on the steep cliffs where snow would have a harder time sticking. And you can play with this too. You know, you may want to get different effects with it. You can actually, one of the things the CTS guys did, which I thought was very neat, I think Bart came up with this, is he created a water effect by playing with this max angle and just making a snow texture that was boosted up to look like a reflective surface. And I thought that was a really neat trick I hadn't seen before. So there's a lot of stuff you can do with these controls beyond just snow. The other parameterizations are the crystals. And what this is basically the age of the snow. So basically, as we get lower values, we're going to get like a soft, fluffy snow. As we go up to higher values, it's going to sort of distort that specular and create something that looks like older snow, which tends to harden on the tops and become more shiny and sort of shows off that specular highlight more. You get this kind of frozen, icy look, which if you've ever been skiing, you know that that is not nearly as nice to ski on as something more like this. So you can use that to sort of create an aging of the snow, maybe over time, however you want to do it, for how long the snow has been there, and create that sort of realistic transition. And then the melt factor controls sort of how wet areas around the snow are. So if we are around the snow and we turn up the melt, you can kind of see it on the edges here. You can see some little bit of meltiness happening. And this has a lot to do with how much the snow ramps off too. So if you have a section like over here where we see partial snow, we should see more of this melt taking place. And that's going to create a wetter surface, which basically is a darkening of the albedo and increase of specular based on the porosity of the material. And the porosity of a material is pretty well related to the roughness or smoothness of the material. So what I actually do is compute that roughness, compute the porosity from the smoothness map. So again, having full PBR textures really helps here. So let's go a little further out, and oops, that's my selection there. And let's go down, and the snow up vector is the final thing. So essentially, the up vector says, well, which way has snow fallen from? If you look at real snowfalls, sometimes they have an angular drift to them where the snow has been, going sideways or something. And so, this can help you do that. If I give it a value in x here, it will actually normalize this vector. So now we have like a 45-degree angle coming from the x axis. And so what's happening here is that we are simulating that snow is fallen from, and let me figure out the direction here. Here we go. So we can see here on this mountain that the snow has fallen coming from the x direction. You can see the x-axis here. And so it's piled up on this side of the mountain. But over here it is not piled up nearly as much. And so because of our current angle, it's really coming this direction, right? And so you do get little bits of snow here where it would have hit. And you do get snow in the valley down here where it would have drifted over this mountain and hit. But that lets you create a much more interesting, overall look to the snow. And if you have a wind direction in your game and you have wind going, then you can align this vector with your wind direction so that, snow builds up on the side of the mountain before building up everywhere. And you could even animate this vector back to 1 to cause a total buildup of snow over the area, which could look pretty awesome if you have a time lapse or something like that in your game. So let's talk about some other included features of the snow. So the snow has a little bit of anti-tiling techniques included with it. I thought this was nicer to put in the snow package than in the anti-tiling package because it's really about dealing with snow. And so if you're familiar with the anti-tiling package and you've watched those videos and you're going to know what these are, basically you have a distance resample for the snow, which is basically a way to sample the texture again for snow based on distance and blend between them. And so as I move close to this, you might be able to see the crossfade. It's kind of hard to notice. You can see the tessellation coming in when we're close. But the idea here is that I crossfade to a lower resolution or larger scale version of the texture far out, and that gives us a nice look from far away and gives us a nice look when we're close in, where the snow is still super detailed and nice. So that's pretty cool. It's also pretty cheap. In this case, I think it's going to be 2 extra samples, or 1 extra sample. And then the other one we have is normal noise, which you probably know from the anti-tiling toolkit. And this basically just blends another normal map into the snow at another resolution. And this tends to give you more lighting information, sort of a rolling hills is the default I created for this. And so it just gives you kind of a puffy roll to the snow. And so that really prevents you from seeing any tiling. This is only 1 sample too. So again, it's very cheap. It's a very nice way to get a snow that doesn't look like it tiles, that has really nice close-up detail. It looks good from far away. And then playing with these settings for angle and things like that, you can get really nice spreads over your terrain. The final option I want to talk about is the World API. So I am on a chat with a bunch of other Unity developers, and we're often integrating our assets together. And a lot of times we find ourselves repeating the same work. And so I basically said to the group, like, hey, why don't we have 1 API for weather and things like that, and we'll just all write to that. And then Adam took that idea running, and he created something called the World API. If you have this installed, and you click this button, then what it will do is it will stop using some of the parameters down here. It'll even stop showing them. So you won't have things like snow amount show up and things like that. And then what it'll actually do is use the data that the World API provides. And so many Unity terrain systems and things like that are going to start writing and reading from this. I expect that some of the major weather solutions are going to start writing to this, and then systems like Gaia and CTS as well are going to start reading from this, so that we all can work together well and not have to write all these silly little integrations between all these systems. So that's a really cool system. There's a get button here. If you get, it'll take you straight to the World Manager, where you can download the World Manager, which is free and free for anybody to integrate with. So that's pretty awesome. So yeah, that's basically it for snow. One other thing I should probably mention is that snow does affect tessellation. So you can see here that as we are blended to the snow surface, we are blending to snow, and that this is considered to be, it pushes up the current tessellation, so it creates a higher higher packed value, and that gives it sort of a nice puffy look when it accumulates on the hills and it covers over all the crevices. So yeah, I think that's it. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the forums. Thanks.